There it is. There it is. Look at him. Look at him in the flesh. Mr. Be Real Nate Diaz taking on BKFC's King of Violence, Mike Perry. Official for May 16th. Now, I just got to say this, and I'll probably have some more for you guys later as well, but well, first of all, 5 rounds, gonna be in LA where this event will be taking place. So just a couple things to knock off the checkbox, if you will. So this event will be at the Intuit Dome. Nate Diaz, West Coast. He's staying in the West Coast. He's coming down to LA for this fight. West Coast versus East Coast. And spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. You guys want to know who I'm picking? I'm picking Nate. I'm picking Nate. I think Mike Perry's a dead man walking. Call me crazy, but Mike Perry is a dead man walking. No way Nate Diaz loses to Mike Perry in MMA. Yes, the bout is taking place under MMA rules on the first ever, Netflix MMA card in history. Here's the fight poster for it. So, it's official. Now there's much more to this. Oh yeah, 5 rounds too. So, I already said that. Yeah, 5 rounds, Netflix, LA, on the Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano card for like the 5th time. It should be the main event, no? This should be the main event, should it not be? Let's be real. Nate Diaz, he out of the UFC now. He been doing his thing. He fought Jake Paul. He fought George Masvidal. Now he doing this. This should be the main event. Mike Perry getting all the dubs outside of the UFC. The UFC didn't see a future with him. They didn't see the bag they could make with him. They didn't see value in him. He takes his talents elsewhere. He competed in triad combat early on when he got cut from the UFC or not re-signed. I don't know what happened with him not, continuing on with them. But he started off in triad combat in that triangular bare knuckle ring, quickly crossed over to BKFC, right, where he's been reigning. He's undefeated in BKFC, if I'm not mistaken. Homie undefeated. Goes ahead and fights Jake Paul. Now he doing this bout. I mean, Mike Perry fought MVP in BKFC. He fought Luke Rockhold. He fought Eddie Alvarez. He fought Chad Mendez. He's been running it up ever since leaving the UFC. Now he's going to cap it off with the big one. Mr. Nate Diaz, the big dog, the final boss when it comes to UFC and MMA. Nate Diaz in the 170-pound division. Low key, he's the final boss. And that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best fighter, although he's one of the top, if we're taking body of work over the last decade, okay, Nate Diaz is one of the top fighters at 170 in the last decade. I don't care what anybody says. So, congrats to Mike Perry taking on the final boss in Nate Diaz. If you get what I'm saying, you get what I'm saying. Don't take it too literal. More on this, more to come on this, but let's just get it all off the chest now. What does this mean, right? And I had one more thing to say about this. It can't go without saying, right? It can't be not acknowledged that just a couple of years ago, Mike Perry was down bad after getting cut from the UFC. He had that whole little thing going on with his ex-wife, Danielle Nickerson, if I'm not mistaken, where, she called the cops on him. She went over to his parents' house and shit like that. There was audio recordings of Mike and his mom and his dad talking to Danielle and shit. There was that scene where Mike Perry got in a fight outside of a bar or a nightclub, so to speak. And he might have had a couple other incidents, like a DUI recently. Maybe in the last 12 months, Mike Perry had some type of DUI where he was going off on the cop. That's not that big of a deal. It was more so those first 2 things I mentioned to you guys. I think he was accused of DV with Danielle. I'm not sure what happened with it. I'm not here to even talk about that, really. I'm just here to say that it's a big turnaround for Mike Perry. A lot of people forget where Mike was when he left the UFC, what state his career was in when he left the UFC. And, he left the UFC on losses, right? He left the UFC, starts crashing out, and here he is in the big 26 getting announced, fighting Nate Diaz on the first ever MMA Netflix card in history. You got to respect it. And I'm going to add on top of it, say what I already said, but add it on one more time. This should be the main event. This should be the main event, boys. Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano should be like the third fight. It should be the last one. It should be the bottom. It should be Mike Perry, Nate Diaz, main event. Francis Ngannou, Felipe Lins, co-main. Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano below that. Nobody gives a fuck about women's MMA. No one ever will. And the more you shove it down our throat, the more we're going to fucking hate it. The worse it's going to be. These women need to be, forced to evolve and actually sell shit, not be essentially used as marketing tactics. You feel me? These women are getting used up as marketing tactics because women's MMA is so underrepresented. They're going ahead and they're bringing in these women, right? And they're making it too easy for them. They're throwing these accolades on them just because they can, because they don't get much opportunities. But what is this going to do? How is this going to force women to innovate? You basically are rewarding them for doing dog shit and nothing. I just told you everything Nate and Mike have been up to in the UFC or outside the UFC since departure. And we got these women headlining the card who haven't been up to shit since their departures from MMA as a whole. So it needs to be said, women getting glazed up out of pity, right? There's another word for it. Patronize. We're patronizing women's MMA. That's what Jake Paul is essentially doing. DEI Promotions, aka MVP Promotions, is patronizing women's MMA by putting Ronda and Gina as the main event, right? You're patronizing, bro, and it's not gonna work. You can't shove it down our throat. They wouldn't sell more tickets anyway. If you talk about live viewership, live streaming numbers, while this event is airing live, okay, you're going to see a big dip after Nate Diaz versus Mike Perry. If you know what's best for you, MVP, aka DEI Promotions, you will put this fight as the main event. If you want all the numbers, you will put this fight as the main event. Because the live viewership is going to tank after Nate Diaz versus Mike Perry. Okay, you want to build it up. Ronda Rousey first, Ngannou second, Diaz Perry main event. Diaz Perry main event, And one more time, stop patronizing women's MMA. Women's wrestling, I fuck with women's wrestling. People think I just always hate the women. No, bro, the women just don't show shit. And they get glazed up. And somebody needs to be the one speaking their mind, such as myself. All right? That's the bottom line. They don't do shit and they get glazed up. When's the last time we saw a super impressive highlight from a woman? I'm waiting. We don't see crazy high-level stuff from women. That's because we patronize the fuck out of them. We don't force them to evolve. And, it needs to happen. They need to find a way to break through. And, they're not thirsty enough yet. They're not thirsty enough yet. In fact, they're probably like being borderline waterboarded. They're being borderline waterboarded because, we're just essentially just throwing opportunities in their laps nonstop. That's all I got to say about the women for now. That's all I got to say about the women for now. But it's like, come on, man. Are we looking out for our best interest or what? Like, okay, so we do this Gina Carano, Ronda Rousey main event thing. Who does that serve? Who does this serve? Exactly, the head kick from Holmes over a decade ago. Shout out to Junior Mint. But who does it serve putting Ronda as the main event? It actually shoots Jake Paul in the foot, putting Ronda as the main event. So I just want to know, who's winning from this? Who's winning from putting Ronda as the main event? Okay. Now that we got the Ronda thing out of the way, right? Let's address the elephant in the room, the real elephant in the room. Okay. What's the elephant in the room, boys? We got one or what? Well, I guess with this announcement comes the fact that we are kissing Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor trilogy goodbye. That's what it seems like to me. We're kissing the Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor trilogy goodbye. The UFC was interested in re-signing Nate, according to Ariel Helwani. The UFC was interested in making the trilogy between Nate and Conor, according to Helwani. According to Luke Thomas, in response to Helwani's reports, Luke Thomas added on top of that, and he said that, there was a catch in this. There's a catch 22 in the negotiations with Nate in the UFC and Nate's decision to ultimately take his talents to the first ever MMA event on Netflix. What is that? Well, the caveat was that if you choose to not sign with us and you go to Jake Paul, kiss your swan song goodbye in the UFC, we're done with you. We're done with you. You're dead to us. You go over there, you're dead to us. We're done with you. That's what Luke Thomas is saying, okay? So with that knowledge, we may have just kissed Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 3 goodbye. But you know what? Fuck the UFC if that's the case. And I'm not saying anything's for certain. I'm telling you guys that's what Luke Thomas is reporting. All right? But if Luke Thomas ain't capping, and he's not much of a capper, dude does tell the truth. He is a journalist. He is certified and, accredited over a long period of time. But if that's true what Luke Thomas is saying, then fuck the UFC, man. Fuck the UFC. Not willing to open up their pockets for Nate Diaz. I'm getting sick of it, man. You open up your pockets for Nate Diaz. Now, one thing that crossed my mind today is it's like, would this deal have gotten done if Dana was just more locked in on the UFC? Like, why can't these fights get done in the UFC? It's not that I'm really hating on the event, right? Or that it's taking place in Netflix, but let's ignore that and just acknowledge the question. Why can't these fights take place in the UFC? Why isn't the UFC making the bouts happen? Why aren't they? Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor. I don't care about the money, bro. Sign the motherfucker. So Juice says, this is huge, though. We can't say MVP ain't doing nothing. And that's what I don't want. So that's why I kind of said it before I started getting on my hate and shit, right, about not getting the Conor fight booked. It's really not, I'm not mad at MVP for booking Nate Diaz. I'm almost calling out the UFC for allowing this signing to happen. Okay, that's what I'm calling the UFC out for. Allowing this signing to happen and not opening up bottomless pockets for Nate Diaz. I don't know what's wrong with them. Why wouldn't you do that? Why would you let this slip through your finger, right, and give this bout to your competitors when this is what the fucking streets are dying for? We're dying for Nate Diaz's return. We're dying for the trilogy with Conor. The second one is very controversial. There's a huge asterisk on that one. I believe Nate Diaz won that shit. And these boys have been getting fucked over by the UFC for years because I just saw another clip today, and I've seen this fight, and he did win. Nick Diaz getting robbed by Carlos Condit for the interim title. Back in the day. Okay, all you new fans, you probably don't know about that shit. Go back and watch it. Okay? All the new fans who kind of don't know about Nick Diaz and he comes off as a strung out druggie to you, go back and watch the Condit fight. All right? You'll learn something about who, Nick Diaz was at one point in time. Go watch the BJ Penn fight. But I just got to say that, I'm kind of disappointed in the UFC for not opening up their pockets for Nate. UFC had their finger off the pulse for a while now. It just, that's a main theme that I see with the UFC. Main theme I see with the UFC is their finger is not on the pulse. Not on the pulse at all. And they're not even really building up their stars as it is. It's just very counterintuitive to me. And I'm almost getting to a point where it's is Hunter Campbell the guy? Who the fuck is letting Nate Diaz go to the competitors? I have to say that one more time. Is Hunter Campbell really the guy? If Dana's giving you the reins and you let Nate Diaz slip through your fingers, you give it to the competitor in Jake Paul, you let Ronda Rousey slip through the fingers, okay, regardless. We don't even want that anyway, but I'm just saying. You know what? Scratch that. Forget I ever said that. Okay, fuck the Ronda Rousey thing anyway. I'm glad they didn't sign her. Okay, that is finger on the pulse. But even, signing an Ngannou just to keep the monopoly going, so to speak. Why not? You know that you have competitors now. Now is the time to keep the monopoly going. You know, play hardball, open up the pockets, because now Jake Paul trying to compete with you. You should have been doing everything in your power to destroy this Netflix card. You know, as soon as Ronda Rousey versus Gina Carano got booked, and then you hear that Francis Ngannou is out of his deal, where's that petty game that Jake Paul's playing with you guys? Why don't you do that to Jake Paul? And ruin his event and sign Ngannou immediately, and then sign Nate Diaz and say, what you gonna put on Netflix? What you gonna put on Netflix? We got Masvidal still under contract too. You know, what you gonna put on Netflix? And don't think for a second that they don't see that stuff coming. Like the UFC, it's chess, not checkers. They always know, you know, 3 steps ahead. They could have easily, they were aware of this, and they didn't do anything about it. You know, they were aware that Ngannou becoming a free agent, right? With this card already being announced, with MVP Promotions actively looking for bouts to put on it for Netflix, they completely missed the mark in re-signing on Ngannou. And now they do it with Nate Diaz. Like, it can't get any worse than this. It cannot get any worse than this. Like, okay, you know, the Ronda fight slips through the fingers, whatever, right? You don't inside Ngannou, okay. But now Nate Diaz? Bro, is this dude the guy? Is Hunter Campbell the guy? Could Dana get these deals done if he wasn't so focused on boxing? You know, could Dana get these deals done? Something tells me Dana could, bro. Something tells me Dana could. America First says Dana got so much money he will never sign Ngannou. Not after he badmouthed Dana. Wake the fuck up, man. That's fine, bro. But like at the end of the day, the UFC had was in the perfect position to completely fuck Ngannou in negotiations. And Ngannou probably would have not done it, right? Because they had Jake Paul on the back end offering him money, right? So if the UFC was going to try to like capitalize on him being a free agent, you know, you do have Jake Paul still negotiating. That's exactly what happened with Nate Diaz. But I don't know, man. By not signing these guys, you're opening up big fights. You're opening up big fights outside the promotion, and I just don't know that that's in the UFC's best interest right now. I don't. You know, this is creating competition, so to speak, by putting these fights together outside. I get it, right? But the UFC should just start opening up the pocketbook and pay these fighters. Like, if we have to do this, right, we have to miss out on these fights to create a competition only for the UFC to now realize that they got to pay fighters. Come on, bro. After missing McGregor Diaz 3, now we're going to realize it. Now we're going to realize we got to pay fighters. After we let Diaz McGregor 3 slip through our fingertips, you should have just paid Diaz. You should have just paid Diaz. Ngannou also has his pride. Even if the deal was good, Ngannou could have said no. No, yeah, I kind of just explained that too. And he likely would have if the UFC was trying to play hardball and then Ngannou got Jake Paul offering him ungodly amounts of money. Like, I get it. I totally get it. But they should have opened up. But this is my point. We just kind of explained that. And then I said, okay, so they let it slip through their fingertip. Now they're going to open up their pocketbooks. Or are they just never going to do it? Because people are praising these fights for getting booked, because it's apparently somehow backhanded way gonna allow the UFC to start paying their fighters more, because this is good competition for everybody, right? Okay, let's see it. And it's a bit, you know, that conversation is a bit complex and intricate. So it's a tough one, but it's very backwards. That's what I'm trying to say, is like all this stuff is backwards, right? A lot of this stuff is backwards right now, and I don't know why. I don't know why the UFC is a bit backwards. Good on Jake Paul for getting the fight booked. You know, good on Jake Paul for giving these fighters other options outside of the promotion. You know, all that stuff is good. But at the same time, I believe that the UFC should have opened up their pocketbooks. You know, I do believe so. Junior Min says Diaz trilogy not happening makes absolutely no sense. Okay, but as soon as that gets announced on Netflix, when Conor's out of his deal, everybody's going to lose their shit. Oh, okay, I read that wrong. Junior Mint saying Diaz trilogy not happening makes no. Yeah, so we are in alliance with our point of view. Because I was just going to tell you, like, I thought you were saying the Diaz trilogy isn't going to happen and it makes no sense. And I was about to tell you, bro, people are going to lose their minds when it gets announced on Netflix if the UFC lets that slip through their fingertips. You know, and it's like, why wouldn't the UFC just want that under their promotion, under their lights? UFC's betting on the new generation, out with the old, in with the new. I don't think that's working. You know, in very few words, I don't think that's working. And I would get it if the UFC was betting on the new generation, but they're not even building up these guys' names. You know, the new generation you're talking about, what kind of efforts is the UFC doing to grow their names? Arguably nothing to grow their names. So, like, you know, I've seen a tweet though, they're saying, you know, if you're below 35, the UFC's not interested in you. And it's like, okay, but you're passing up on some serious opportunities here with that blanket statement. And I don't think it should be that black and white. You know, 35 years old. Come on, bro. Yeah, don't be putting a 40-year-old up against a 32-year-old. But Nate versus Conor 3 in the UFC. Please take my money. You know, Ngannou versus Aspinall, Ngannou versus Jones, Ngannou versus Pereira. Take my fucking money. I don't care about the beef, bro. I don't care about the beef.